Welcome to the Power of One. Today, I'm going to speak with Captain Overwise from the Accident Investigation Unit for the Philadelphia Police Department. He's going to speak about hit and run and how severe they are and how they change families' lives and victims' lives. Welcome to the show, Captain. Captain Overwise, please tell me how many hit and runs took place in the city of Philadelphia in 2021 and so far for 2022.
Thanks, Melany. It's still early in the year. We're still compiling numbers, but here's what I can do. I can speak to the fatalities that we investigated here at the Accident Investigation District and the hit and run fatalities. In 2021, we had 21 hit and run fatalities, and this year so far, we only have one. Only one. One is too many.
That's true. That's true. And is that one Miss Angela Key?
Yes.
So sad.
Yes, it is.
So sad. A 65 or 64-year-old woman and her family's thinking that she was probably getting off the bus and someone just hit and killed her and just left her there, which is so heartbreaking. Now, does lighting, stop signs, and speaking to Miss Key's family, Stanley Key, her son, he indicated like where they get off the bus right there, there's no sidewalk. Those things play a part in trying to minimize hit and runs in the city of Philadelphia?
Well, environmental factors are investigated as far as how they contribute to the crash in general. I meet monthly with the Vision Zero Task Force, which works under the Managing Director's office, and we investigate those circumstances to see what kind of environmental changes could be made that would reduce the incidence of the crash. The hit and run, however, that's a choice made by the driver, and I don't know how you can really prevent that other than educating the drivers as to what's at stake, what goes into that decision. We're always better off staying on location and calling 911 because we're obligated under the law to do that. So preventing hit and runs with our environmental conditions, I don't think that we can correlate that.
Okay. Now, is your office called out to every hit and run, even with like just vehicles, pedestrians? So is your office called out to every hit and run, and how often are offenders apprehended? Okay,
so we get 58,000 average reported crashes every year at the Philadelphia Police Department. About 28% of those are hit and runs, so that's roughly 16,000 plus hit and runs per year. And the Philadelphia Police Department doesn't have the capacity to respond to every one of those. So we have to triage the calls we do receive, but we respond to the most serious hit and run crashes and crashes where there is a chance of solvability. We don't always respond to those scenes because, like I said, our capacity, but we do investigate hit and run crashes that have the ability to be solved, even if there are minor injuries. But anyone with major injuries or fatalities, we certainly investigate.
Okay. Tell me how important it is to have cameras in certain sections of the Philadelphia. I can imagine that you have your hotspots with your hit and runs, just like we do with the crime, and then certain cameras are placed. Is that the same thing for hit and run areas, again, where they occur often?
Right. Well, you're right about that. We do have surveillance cameras in high crime areas, and I testified at City Council last year about hit and runs in February of last year. It's almost a year ago. And what we were able to find is that we can correlate the incidence of vehicular crashes and incidents of violent crime, and they concentrate in the same areas. So strategically, we could put not only surveillance cameras, but automated license plate readers in those areas and try and enhance our chances of solving the hit and runs. Because one thing I want to point out is that there's no correlation or relationship between a victim of a hit and run and the driver, right? So when homicide detectives or divisional detectives are investigating violent crimes, a lot of times you can associate the victim and the perpetrator or suspect with some sort of nexus. It's either the drug trade or some other sort of criminal element, or they knew each other in cases of some violent crime where there's a personal relationship. And that gives you a starting point to sort of try and solve that crime. Well, with hit and run, it's just happenstance. It's these two parties meet at a certain location, and the tragedy results, but it's very difficult to get a starting point for that. So we rely a lot on surveillance video. And we get lucky a lot. And sometimes it's better to be lucky than to be good. And we get lucky a lot with surveillance. But when we're not lucky, it makes it much more difficult. So they're very important.
Is there certain hotspots in the city of Philadelphia, or is it just like random? But I can imagine the Roosevelt Boulevard is one of the hotspots. And again, this is just me, but is there certain areas in Philadelphia where you see most of the hit and runs?
No, hit and runs, as I said, you'll see more of them where you see more crashes. So if we go to our hotspots and see where the crashes are occurring, and we do have hit and runs. But again, overall, it's like I said, 28%. So 1 in 4 crashes are hit and runs. Roosevelt Boulevard is, highly traveled and all, but just for an example, last year for our fatalities along Roosevelt Boulevard, there were 9 fatalities. Not all of them were hit and runs. In 2020, we had 13 fatalities on Roosevelt Boulevard. Overall, so in 2021, we had 126 fatal crashes. So only 9 of them occurred on Roosevelt Boulevard. There's a little more research to be done with that, as far as where they occur and why.
Okay. If someone sees a hit and run and they want to report that anonymously, what can they do?
The best thing to do is call 911 and relay the information while it's still fresh in your mind. Okay. But I did forward you a website. There's a blank form for reporting information anonymously on www.phillypolice.com. There's a button, submit an anonymous tip there. You can do that as well. We rely a lot on anonymous tips. I could think of one crash in particular we're still investigating, where the anonymous tips were very helpful because we use that as a jumping point to try and get other information. So I would encourage anyone who sees something, even if they're not sure of what it is, to call or report it via the tip line, and it comes through our office and we investigate it.
Okay. Captain Overwise, please tell the viewers how hard your department works around the clock in trying to solve those hit and runs, especially when lives are lost, because sometimes people think that crimes can be solved within 24 to 48 hours, and we know that's not always the case. So please tell us how hard your department works and what's the process in investigating a hit and run?
As I mentioned to you before, it's more difficult in some respects because, as I said, we don't have that relationship that we can use as a starting point to try and get more information to investigate and solve. But we have, I have right now 21 investigators that work all 3 shifts, 365 days a year. And, as I said, we were about 3,000 investigations that we had last year. Okay, not all of them were hit and runs, but in total 3,000 investigations. So you can do the math and see how difficult it is. For fatalities, we solve about 48% of our hit and run fatalities. It's very difficult. And you mentioned that it doesn't take 24 to 48 hours. Even with the best information, it takes a while because here's the thing: you have a hit and run crash. And I'll give you an example we encounter a lot. We recover a vehicle that we believe is involved. And now we have to prove who was driving that vehicle, because it's easy to say we can go get the owner and drag them out of their house and bring them in and interrogate them. It doesn't work that way, right? We need probable cause in order to get search warrants. And we have to prove the standard of proof for criminal cases beyond a reasonable doubt. We have to prove beyond a reasonable doubt who was driving that vehicle. And that is very difficult sometimes. And as I said, in our fatalities, we're successful in 45 to 50% of the time for that. It is difficult.
Yeah. And speaking of your wonderful team, you have Officer Boone in your hit and run department, who is the victim assistance officer for the hit and run division. She does great things. I cannot say enough about all the victim assistance officers in the city of Philadelphia who do they do great work
Yes, they do.
in contacting the victims and contacting their families after a very traumatic incident has occurred. So kudos to all of those victim assistance officers and Officer Boone for all the work.
Yes, they do. They do great work, and she is for us and for the other victims assistance officers. That's our communication arm, is, if you will, is that we rely on Jennifer a lot to communicate with the victims, because our investigators, they have multiple investigations, so they don't always get a chance to communicate with the victims' families. So we rely on Jennifer to do that a lot for us.
That's awesome. Is there anything, Captain, that you want to share with someone who has, again, done the unthinkable and it was not intentional, and they actually hit someone, and that someone is now injured or they lost their life, and that person made the decision to leave the scene of the crime? What message would you have for those people?
Well, I'm glad you said decision. It absolutely is a decision, and it's something that a person needs to think really hard on and think long about what the consequences are of that. But with crashes that involve a death or personal injury, if a death is involved and you leave the scene, that's a felony in the second degree. And there's a minimum prison term of less than 3 years, a mandatory minimum fine of $2,500. If the crash involves serious bodily injury, it's a felony in the third degree. Minimum prison of not less than 90 days, a mandatory minimum fine of $1,000. For crashes that involve damage to an occupied vehicle or property where there's no injuries, that's a misdemeanor in the third degree. And these are all things that when you're caught and you're convicted, this is a criminal record that you need to think about. Well, there's just property damage, it's a ticket, but that ticket, again, it's part of your traffic driving record and your insurance. So you really need to think long and hard about that decision. It looks better, even if you panic. If someone drives and they hit something and they're not sure and they panic and they go home and they call 911, that's looked at and viewed better than if they do nothing or they take steps to get away with it. That's even worse. We catch up with people like that, and the consequences are more severe because now you're talking about possibly being charged with tampering with evidence in the cases where you try to conceal your involvement in your role. And let's just remember that none of us believe that any of these things happen intentionally. Remember what I said before, that this is happenstance. You're driving along, maybe you're not driving the way you should drive, and maybe you did contribute to the crash, but you still didn't do it intentionally. It's not the same as an intentional act. So if you stay, you're not looking at severe consequences. If you leave, you just made it a certainty that you're going to have some severe consequences when you're caught. You have to think, is it worth the gamble of leaving the scene? I just can't imagine if I did that, I'd be thinking for the rest of my life, today is the day I'm going to get caught.
Right.
Come knocking on our door. And, we do knock on the door of a few people, and they're not surprised to see us, but they save themselves a lot of grief and aggravation if they just tell us what happened in the beginning.
Now, with those felonies, can they lose their license for life?
I don't know about license for life. I mean, I'd have to look over the vehicle code for that, but you're looking at 3 years in jail. That's 3 years of your life.
That's very, yeah.
Yeah, it's 3 years of your life in jail. When if you stay on the scene and you explain your situation, you're not going to. I'm not going to say with certainty you're not going to go to jail, but there's a lot less chance of going to jail if you stay on location and fulfill your obligations under the law. Pennsylvania law and most other states say that you have to pull over forthwith and contact 911 to get emergency help, and you satisfy your obligation under the law when you do that.
Right. Well, Captain Overwise, I thank you so much for joining me today. This is so heartbreaking, and we want people to know that there is help for their family members or for them if they were a victim of a hit and run. Thank you so much for joining me today, Captain.
Well, thank you. I appreciate it. And I'll just again repeat, you can call 911 with the information. You can call my headquarters at 215-685-3180 or 3181, or don't hesitate to fill out that anonymous tip page on www.phillypolice.com.
Thank you.
Thank you for the opportunity.
Now joining me is Stanley Key and LaToya. Stanley Key lost his mother, Angela Key, on January 7th, 2022, during a hit-and-run incident. It took his mother, and it took LaToya's grandmother. Stanley Key and LaToya, thank you so much for taking your time to join me today. Stanley, tell me how your life changed on January 7th, 2022.
My life will never be the same. My life, this right here, has, has hit, what I'm saying? It's sinking in and it's hitting hard, what I'm saying? This is the toughest battle, what I'm saying, I ever fought in my life. This is the best way I can, what I'm saying? It's undescribable, to be honest with you. And I'm good, what I'm saying? I'm well educated, but to be totally honest with you, you wanted to know how my life changed. My life stopped for a minute. It's, what I'm saying? It's coming back in order with the, what I'm saying? With the show of love from my family, my daughters and them, and how them, what I'm saying? They're concerned for me and my well-being. But my life will never be the same. I mean, this was my best friend. Not only my best friend, this was my mother. You only get one. God is only going to give you one.
And
you know what I'm saying?
And he's the only child.
I'm the only child.
Right.
It was me and her. Look, I'm going to tell you something, right? They say a loving mother is like a hug from God. I believe I'm blessed. And so I know she would want me to travel on because life goes on, but I want some justice for this. My mother, I knew my mother was my best friend, but at the same time, and I'm 48 years old, I still knew she was in charge.
Right.
I respected her will, and whatever she said, it goes. There's no debating with that. There's no anything. Even if I didn't agree with it, but if she agreed with it, that was what it was.
That's all it takes. My grandma's word was over everything.
She, what I'm saying?
Yeah, right. LaToya, tell me how January 7th, 2022 changed your life, and tell me what happened on January 7th, 2022.
On January 7th, we received a phone call that my grandmother was hit. We didn't know the circumstances. We didn't know if she was okay. So when we finally got to when we finally learned that it was her that was hit on the block not the block, but the Crescentville Road where she lived for 30 years. When we got to the hospital, we realized that, that was our grandmom indeed. And they let us know that she didn't make it. So from there, it's like it hit reality when we went back there and seen that that was our grandmother. So to me, it affected me tremendously. That was, I didn't have my mother growing up. My father was incarcerated for 16 years. So he's just coming home after 16 years. That was all we had was our grandmothers. So that wasn't just a grandmother to me. That was my mother. That was, someone who provided for us, not just us. She did for our children. That was, listen, you need help? No matter what it was, she did it for us. That was our support.
My mother was a good person.
That damaged us, and not only us, our children are damaged. That was someone that we all live in the same complex. So it's like my daughter will come home and what she would do? Oh, I'm going to grandma's house. So it's like now she's coming here and they don't see grandmom. It's affecting them. They can't walk in here the same. So to us, it's not just a loss of a grandmother. That was also our mother because we didn't have a mother growing up. Our mother was passed away at the age when we was 6, 7 years old.
With the elected officials that are watching, tell me about that area where your mother was hit. Tell me how changes can be made so no one else will experience.
They need a crosswalk. They need a crosswalk at that sign. They need a real bus stop there. There's no real bus
There's
stop.
no bus
There,
stop.
if you
There's no
walk,
traffic
if you
lights.
take, honestly, you can come see. You get off the bus lets you right off.
It's
and
a
on
creek
the
in back
street,
of where that
and it's
bus
a
is at.
creek. If you take 3 steps, you can slip and fall into the creek
So the only option is to get off
Tony
that
Creek.
bus and walk right in the street.
and walk right in the street. That's their only option.
So we did hear this plea. Angela Key lost her life on January the 7th, 2022. Her son, Stanley Key, has lost his mother and best friend. And Latoya lost her grandmother, who was the rock of the family. If you know anything regarding this hit and run accident, we ask that you call 911 to report it. Stanley, my condolences. Latoya, my condolences. Thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you. Thank you. And I appreciate everything.
Thank you for joining me today. My heart goes out to all of the hit and run victims. My heart goes out to all of those family members who has lost a loved one due to a hit and run accident. Peace and blessings, and I pray that you will have peace for 2022 and the coming years.